Welcome back to part two of my chat with Jerildene Cane. Jerildene's younger sister, Leisl Smith, disappeared on the New South Wales Central Coast back in 2012. After a lengthy investigation, the person known to Lisel, James Church, was charged with Liesl's murder. In part one, we talked about the way that Jerildene became aware of Liesl's disappearance and the impact it's had on her. And bearing in mind, this is over a 6-year period that part one Jerildene described. We're now going to hear from Jerildene what it was like attending the trial and what she learnt during the trial and her version of the unforeseen twist at the end of the trial and how she dealt with that. We're also going to discuss if there is any way Liesl's family can find out what happened to Leisl and get some form of justice. Jerildene, welcome back.
Hey Gary, thank you.
Again, I apologise for discussing this and dragging this up, but I think it's important that people talk about their experiences like your experience. So I want people, and I was always at pains as a homicide detective, I want people to understand what families are going through when people have disappeared or people have been murdered, and it's horrendous. And unless you've been there, I don't think you can fully appreciate it.
It wasn't on my bucket list of things to do, put it that way. I don't know anyone that would have that as something to do on their bucket list.
No, sad.
You know, as I said before, that sort of stuff always happened to other people, and you feel compassion and empathy, and then, as you said, you go into the next thing until you become those other people and it happens to you.
Yeah.
It's certainly not something that I ever thought would happen to me or that I would have to explain to people. Even now, I don't really talk about it. It's quite difficult. I tend to talk about it with people that I've known for a long time. So if I meet someone new, it's not really something that I bring up. It's just...
It's a hard topic to bring up, and sometimes people don't know how to deal with you bringing the topic up, and it's almost like, what do I say?
Well, yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, and I think a lot of people tend to think that we want you to fix what's gone on, and you can't. I don't necessarily have that expectation of anyone that I talk to Lisel about. But, sometimes I just want people to listen or to recognise that, missing people affect everybody in society. It's not just, the immediate families and their friends, but it is the whole of society. It's the fabric of society that missing people, affect. And as I said to you in a previous conversation, society, I look at society as a bolt of fabric that's got different weaves in it, and missing people are one of those threads. And if you don't have that thread, then that fabric pattern isn't complete. You're missing a thread. It's, it's not like you can suddenly find, it's a pulled thread and fix it up. And in some cases that happens. And I am so happy for those families that do find their missing loved ones. But there are also quite a number of us that don't, and, realistically never will.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? It's very hard to come to terms with that. We're going to talk about the murder trial with Liesl's case. Before we do, just describe the type of person Lisel was. She was 23 years old where she disappeared. How was she? Just describing Lisel as a person.
She was her own person. She liked her own company. She was just doing life like any other 23-year-old, making mistakes, making good choices, making bad choices, working out what she wanted to do as a job, whether that was for the rest of her life or for 6 months until, she found something else she wanted to do. She was working it out, like any other 23, well, most 23-year-olds,
It's a great time of life, isn't it? you're old enough to make the mistakes, but you've also got some control on your life, and it's an exciting time of life as 23
Yeah,
year
I
old.
wouldn't mind being 23 again, but that's
Oh
never going to
yeah,
happen.
if we could work out to wind the clock back, yeah,
I'll keep the
definitely.
wisdom. I'll
Yeah,
keep the wisdom, thanks, but I'll take the rewinding age.
I think we could sell that to a few people.
Oh, I'm sure we could.
Okay, the experience of a murder trial, and I've been to countless murder trials, and I've got to say they're emotionally and physically draining. I never come out at the end of a murder trial the same as I went into it, and I'm just sitting, I'm a police officer involved on the peripheral. I can't even fathom how much it drains you being a family member going through a murder trial. Do you want to talk us through the whole process?
So I got informed that I would be subpoenaed to give evidence at the trial,
Yep.
and got served with a subpoena that was arranged. I was warned, which was good because I could warn work that I was required, because I work for a state health service. There are requirements about when I'm subpoenaed, like when I was subpoenaed, that I had to inform certain people
Yeah.
and whatnot. So I was forewarned, and I, spoke to the barristers a couple of times before I got on the stand. They did their best to prep me, which I found really helpful, and they were very understanding that, that's something else that wasn't, was never on my bucket list. I was always, always worried about going to coroner's court for work, and I probably have nothing to worry about that in that regard. Pardon me. So they did their best to sort of prep what they would ask and what they were going to question me about. Obviously, they couldn't tell me what the defence was going to ask. They also had told me a few months previously when this was moving through the courts. So, as you would know, with a homicide charge, it moves through the local and the district courts first, and then an application is made to the Supreme Court to have the charge heard in the Supreme Court.
It's a long
For those
process.
that aren't aware, it's a very long process. And in the midst of this process, COVID had hit. So we had a delay of, I think, about 6 to 8 months because everything just shut down, which certainly didn't help.
No, adds to the trauma.
Yeah, it certainly didn't help because you want things to progress, but at the same time, it was a worldwide pandemic. So, yet something else that's out of your control that you can't do anything about. And so I knew that the judge was, she was strict but fair, and I have nothing but the utmost praise for Justice Fullerton. So I was subpoenaed. I couldn't listen to the first 2 weeks of the trial because I was a witness.
Yeah, and I
which
just
is standard.
explain that to people because, again, most people don't get experience
Subpoenaed?
in the criminal courts, and especially the murder trial. But if you're a witness in a murder trial, regardless of your relationship to the victim or your involvement, until you're given evidence, you're excluded from the court. You can't go in there, and understood why you can't hear other people give evidence before you give your evidence. But that in itself can be very frustrating. I've been in charge of murder investigations where I've had to sit, I'm virtually the last witness, so I've had to sit outside the whole trial of a matter that you've invested years into and not knowing what's going on. I'm only the police officer, you're a family member. How frustrating was it sitting outside while the murder trial for your sister was going on?
I actually had to do my evidence via AVL, audio-visual.
Yep.
I had some health problems and had required surgery, and I wasn't allowed to fly. So originally the defendant's lawyer had wanted me up in Sydney in person, so I don't live in New South Wales. And there was a lot of toing and froing about, me going up there, and in the end I had to get a letter from the specialist saying that I was not medically cleared to fly. And Justice Fullerton went, that's it, she's doing it via audio-visual.
Yeah.
Which was done at the one of the courthouses in the capital city I live in. The biggest issue was the dates kept changing. So I think there was like 1 or 2 dates. Initially, we were given a date, and then that was changed because they didn't get through witnesses, or there was some sort of discussion between the barristers and the judge, and then it got changed again, and it was frustrating because, we've got kids. I was trying to get time off work.
Courts are like a doctor's surgery. They line up about 10 patients that they know they can't fit in the same day, in the same
Yeah,
hour, and that's what they do with witnesses. So I do
yeah,
understand your frustration. It is the nature of the justice system in the courts. Always got
yeah.
to have it.
That was explained
Yeah,
to me. That I wasn't left hanging. I was
yeah,
explained we didn't get through everyone. Evidence took longer today, and I was like, okay, cool. And that I didn't have a problem with that necessarily because I was kept in the loop of what was going on. I
yeah.
was like, yep, fine. And then finally, they cemented in a date and a time, and I had to basically sit in a room. The only person who I could see was the judge and the defence lawyer and the two barristers. I couldn't see the defendant or anybody else in the courtroom, which, in all honesty, was completely fine with me.
Yeah.
And I gave evidence. Justice Fullerton was very thorough, and there are a couple instances where I think she realised that I possibly not didn't quite understand what was being asked, and so she
Yeah.
clarified for me, which was very appreciated. I gave evidence, I think, for just under 2 hours, and the DPP were very good. They covered what they had said that they would cover, so I was prepared for that. And then the defence lawyer started, and some of the questions that he asked I just found completely inane and irrelevant, but it's not my job to work out why he was asking
Yeah.
those questions. I answered as best as I could. Towards the end, I got frustrated and didn't lose my temper, but my frustration showed. And I remember sitting there, feeling like I'd run a marathon. I
Yeah.
had tried to keep myself calm, and recognise that, I'm doing this to help with my sister. I can't get emotional, I can't get frustrated. But he kept hammering home one particular point, and in the end, I just turned around and snapped at him, for want of a better word. And then that was the end of questioning. I was excused. I remember just getting up and going as soon as I was excused, because my understanding was that once you're excused, if they want you back in court, they have to re-subpoena you. So I didn't want to give them any time to do that. And
Smart
then,
play.
sorry?
Smart play.
Yeah, I fled. I
You're
was out
a
of there.
quick learner.
Yeah. And in some ways, I felt a sense of relief and like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, because I could now find out what was going on. I could listen to the evidence. They had to apply to the judge to get clearance for me to be able to, and she gave that. And I think it was about a week before I felt like I could sit there and listen to what was being said in court.
So they set up facility for an AVL for you to listen to the full
They
trial.
email you a link that you
Yep.
can link into, and you have to log in, and they obviously realise who it is, and then off you go. That was horrendous. The thing that really got me is that they were discussing Lisel and the things that were said about her, in particular by the defence. I know that the defence lawyer was doing a job that he was being paid to do, but it's still not nice to hear certain things said, regardless of whether they are true or not, about a family member, as I'm sure people that have experienced this can appreciate. And I guess the biggest sense of injustice at that point for me was that Lisel had no way of defending herself against what was being said. If any of half of what was said in a public domain or on Facebook or any other social media, you could go after someone for defamation, and whatnot, and slander and everything else. And, this is in a criminal court, and they can basically say what they like about the person, in this case, my sister.
And
So I,
it is hard for loved ones that with victims that, and you've nailed it, the point, she's not there to defend herself. So they can throw speculative comments up about the type of person she is or things that might have been done, and she's not there to defend herself. So I can understand how painful that would be for a loved one to watch that play out.
Yeah, it basically felt like it was a free for all, open slather on her. And that was really frustrating and quite upsetting a number of times, some of the things that were said, especially by the defence lawyer. And as I said, I understand he's got a job to do. And that's, from what I understand, that's the way criminal court is. It's...
Exactly. Well, it's an adversarial system, and that is the way that matters are adjudicated. Can I just, to put it in context so people understand, and we won't go through all the evidence, but just in context, the basic summary of the trial. So in 2012, Lisel left house one day to drive to Tuggerah train station, parked the car, and then a witness saw her getting into another white ute. It was the last time she was seen alive. She was a missing person for 6 years. They've never found a body. Everything pointed to Jim Church, an older neighbour who was a local horse trainer. Rumours were Lisel had an affair with him, got pregnant, and he killed her. Her body has not been found. Now, that's a very brief description of the type of allegations, not going into the full facts of the matter, but just so people, when we're talking about it, understand what was going on with this trial. Because the trial ran for, correct me if I'm wrong, 13 and a half weeks?
70 days, yep.
Yep. It was a judge-alone trial?
Yes, it was.
Was that explained to you?
Yeah, it basically meant that it was the judge and the judge alone who heard all the evidence, heard all the arguments, and, made rulings on what could or couldn't be submitted and what not. There was no jury whatsoever. My understanding is usually there's a choice. You can have a judge and a jury, or you can have a judge alone trial. The option, as far as I understood, wasn't given in this case because of COVID. So,
okay.
Which is, to me, neither here nor there. So,
yeah. During the course of the trial, you're listening to it. You've got over the time period where you were excluded from the court. You've given your evidence, and now you're starting to listen to the trial. How did you think the trial was going?
I kept an open mind because, as everyone knows in this country, you have the right to be presumed innocent until found guilty in a court of law. And in some ways, I wanted to listen to bear witness for Lisel. That was how I felt. And I wanted to hear what the evidence was with my own ears. There were a number of witnesses that were expert witnesses on phone towers and roadworks and, all these other bits and pieces that were crucial to the case for the DPP. And what I found really good was that Justice Fullerton, if she wasn't clear on something, she got the person who was in the stand at the time to clarify so that she completely understood what the evidence they were giving was about, which was very helpful. As the trial progressed, and more witnesses were gone through, I started forming my own opinion. And I think the crux of it came towards the end when both my stepdad and the defendant were called to give evidence, along with, by this stage, the police interviews with the defendant had been played. I think there were about 5 or 6, as well as telephone intercept recordings. And I said to the barristers for the DPP at one stage, I'm surprised they didn't hear me yelling at the computer from interstate, because I was just so incredulous about what the defendant had said, in regards to Lisel. The way that he spoke about her and the person he was with at the time, who was apparently the love of his life, was just disgusting, and the way that he presented himself in court versus what he said when he thought no one was listening was a very stark contrast.
This was the covert evidence was gathered through listening devices or phone taps.
Yes, yes. So there were listening devices planted in his parents' house where there were conversations recorded between his parents and his sister, as well as him. They planted listening devices in I think his car, and in his house. And there had also been intercepts picked up between him and other witnesses. So basically, he hadn't outright asked people to lie for him to provide an alibi, but he had said, "Oh, you stick with the story." Yeah. And once those had been disproven, my understanding was that he really had nowhere to go with, explaining where he'd been. Phones had been turned off and then turned on, and he was like, "Oh, but I was, at my girlfriend's house at the time." And they said, "Okay, fine. But she's rung your mobile," and, everyone's done the thing where, "I can't find my mobile, can you ring it for me," sort of thing. But she'd also rung his landline as well. And it showed when they had telecommunication experts come in that he'd actually turned his phone off until like 1:30 or something in the morning.
It was on the crucial time.
On the crucial time. The other thing was that up until the 19th of August, he and Lisel, I think in the course of 4 to 6 weeks or something, had exchanged nearly 2,000 text messages. I think it was like 1,800, just over 1,800, contacts.
Yeah.
And the 19th of August came and went, and it was literally like it had dropped off a cliff. There was nothing. He didn't text her. He didn't message her. He didn't ring her to find out if she was okay. I know I'm not the only one that messaged or tried to contact her. There was nothing from his phone.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty telling. I'm talking in the general sense here, so yep. I want to clarify that. But if I'm looking and there's just someone disappears and then the person that's been in constant contact doesn't contact that person, makes you ask questions. Tell me, with the detail there, like the way that you're describing it, and we should explain, or a disclaimer here, this is just the observations of a trial that you've witnessed. So we're not saying going through facts detail by detail. We're just your observations. Seems to be a thorough investigation. Let's wind it back when your frustration with the police. If the communication was better, like I would suggest you're looking at the investigation now and it was playing out in the trial, that you think, okay, well, they were working on it. Does it change your view on your dealings with the police?
I think they'd obviously put a number of resources and a lot of time into the investigation. At the trial, they were there along with their wives, which I was very appreciative of, given how much time that this has taken up of their lives. It wouldn't just be, it's not a 9-to-5 job.
Nor should it be. I feel I've pushed that for a very long time. Yeah.
So I was very appreciative that they came along to see the outcome. I give credit to how much work and resources was put in. I just feel that if they had have explained that at the start, and just had that compassion and that empathy and humanity, at least in their dealings with me, I can't speak for their dealings with anybody else.
Yeah.
I feel that I probably would have had a different view, and I would have a different view now. I still view it as, they really could have done it better. And not necessarily treated me with kid gloves, but not treated me the way that they did.
Yeah.
I felt that was unwarranted and undeserved. And if they had have changed the way or, approached the way that they interacted with me on a different angle, and I guess expressed understanding, that I was frustrated, what's going on, and explained, as I said earlier, we are working, but we can't explain what we're doing at the moment. I think things may have been a lot easier for me to some degree, in that I would have understood that they were working. At the trial, they had put a lot of work into their case, proving time, how long it took to drive from point A to point B, why it was impossible that he said he was here when his car was, he was
There.
at point C when his car was at point D, etc. And all this, the case was built around circumstantial evidence that was quite strong.
Yeah. Because
So
there was no evidence presented where Liesl's body is. The Liesl's body wasn't recovered, so there's no evidence presented there.
no, there's nothing.
You've been watching the trial now for 10, 11 weeks. At the end of the trial, the prosecution would have summed up and the defence would have summed up and pulling together all the evidence that's gone by. How did you feel? Were you, when I say confident being assuming the result that you were seeking would be that the person was convicted, were you confident that he would be found guilty?
I will be honest and say I certainly hope that he would be.
Yeah.
From my personal observations, I couldn't see how any other verdict could be reached. There were huge gaps in things that he said, and the way, he tried to explain certain things away just made absolute no logical sense. It may have made sense to him, but it certainly didn't make sense to me. And from some of the questions that the judge had asked, I got the impression that she was trying to work out how it made sense as well. I didn't know what the judge would come down with. And this was a discussion between my husband and I, actually. He said, what if he is found guilty? And I said, look, I'm not the judge. I don't have that legal backing. She has nothing to do with the case, and that's the whole point of the legal system in Australia.
Yeah.
You bring forth your argument, you argue on the basis of your evidence as to what you think has happened, and then, the judge retires to make a verdict on the basis of points of law that, they've spent God knows how long, understanding and applying. And that's what should happen. If it had have come back not guilty, I would not have necessarily agreed with her. But at the same point, I'm not a Supreme Court judge. I don't have to apply the law. And in all honesty, I would never want that responsibility, because you're making judgments about people's lives for all, intents and purposes. You're either, sentencing them to jail for whatever period of time you may deem relevant at some point, or you're setting them free. And on the flip side, you have a family, that may or may not agree with what you come up with. That's a huge responsibility.
Geraldine, just in what you've said there, I think you're showing what a fair and objective person you are, even when you're looking at a trial like that. So, yeah, it says a lot about you as a person, that you can offer that opinion when you're talking about a murder trial relating to your sister. You got notified that the verdict was going to be handed down, and I think the date that was set was the 8th of July 2022. What went through your mind when you knew a date was going to be set when the judge was going to come back with a guilty or not guilty verdict?
Not a lot initially, funnily enough. We were driving up to see my in-laws when we got the, I think it was a message, to say that the judge had set a date. We'd asked for a date because obviously living interstate, we had to organise work schedules and flights and whatnot. And I think I was just in shock that, at this stage it had been just on a month. Actually, I think it was a month to the day when we got told that the judge was ready to hand down her verdict. We'd asked for a week's notice and she gave us 5 days.
Yep.
Originally, I think it was going to be 48 hours.
Yeah.
In some ways, I wish it had been 48 hours, but I don't necessarily think that would have changed anything that happened afterwards. And so it was a mad scramble to organise flights and whatnot. And I don't think I actually processed anything and I hadn't up until the day before. I think just because so much needed to be organised,
So
still had to go to work.
you were going up there to see the judge hand down the findings. That was the plan.
Yes, yep. I would not have missed that for the world. I couldn't be there during the trial physically.
Yeah.
Other responsibilities, during that thing called life. But I was definitely going to be there for the verdict.
And then this roadblock, this thing that I've never heard of in all my time in policing at such a crucial stage. You get notified that the person that was charged with your sister's murder and had been the accused in a 13-and-a-half-week trial, the judge was going to hand down her findings on the 8th of July, and on the 7th of July he killed himself.
Yeah, I remember that phone call. I don't think I'll forget that as long as I live. I was at work. I think I was like 2 hours into a shift. I was working in recovery at this stage. I'd had to leave ICU because of the stress of what was going on with the trial. And then, ICU is a high acuity area, as I've mentioned. I couldn't do both. I had nothing left. So I moved to another area where I could use those skills, but it wasn't as, emotionally demanding. And I remember I had my phone in my pocket because we were trying to organise flights and, and bits and pieces. And it rang, and I remember pulling it out of my pocket, out of my scrubs, and thinking, oh, that number looks odd. And I don't know what it was, but I was like, I've got to answer this. So I walked around the corner from the nurse's desk where it was semi-private and answered the phone, and it was the social worker attached to the case. And she asked me if I was at work or at home. And I said, no, I'm at work. And she's like, oh, there's been a development. And I remember saying, he pled guilty. I mean, I would have fallen over, because I was adamant that there was no way he was going to change his plea, which had been not guilty. And he was very adamant that he hadn't done it the entire way through the trial. And she went, no. And I'm like, okay. So, I think I said something else, and she was like, no. She said, look, is there any way that you can get on a video conference call? This was at about 10:30 in the morning. And I said, oh, I'm at work. And she said, oh, what time do you finish? And I was like, well, 5, but like, what's going on? And she said, oh, I don't really want to tell you. And I just said, you've got to tell me. I said, like, I need to focus for what I do. If you don't tell me, I'm not going to be able to focus, and that potentially puts, my patients at risk because I'm going to be wondering what's going on. And she said, let me just dial in the 2 barristers. So she did that. And she said, oh, they got on the phone and, asked me how I was and stuff. And they said, oh, there's been a notification at the defendant's house. There's been an ambulance and the police called of a deceased body. And I do believe the entire word of Mother F came out of my mouth quite loudly.
Understandable.
And I remember just saying, are you serious? And they said, yeah, we're waiting on confirmation. We can't get in touch with your stepdad. We're trying to at the moment. And I was like, okay. And they said, are you able to set something up so that we can talk to you, face to face through Zoom? And I said, leave it with me. I'll have a chat to my bosses, and I'll get back in touch. And they said, yep. I walked around to my in-charge and said, I've got to go to our nurse unit manager, so my big boss's office. I remember walking in there and I saw one of the other ANUMs from anaesthetics. So anaesthetics is theatre, recovery is when you wake up. And I remember walking there and just asking where my boss was because she knew I'd had to show her the subpoena and stuff. And I remember just shaking, and they were like, oh no, she's at a meeting. And I'm like, can you please ring her? And I think the look on my face, they just went, yeah, sure. And they said, oh, do you want me to tell her what's about? And I said, just tell her it's Jerildene and she needs to come here. And so he very kindly rang her. She turned up 5 minutes later. I rang Matt in that time, he had been in town and was on the way home and basically did a UE. I was like, I can't drive home, Matthew. If I get into the car, I'm going to have an accident. You know, I'm in no shape to drive. So he did a UE and came back in. And my boss had come back at that point, and I had quickly explained to her what had happened. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm out for the shift. And she was like, not a problem. My husband turned up in theatre cap booties and a theatre gown that was 2 sizes too small for him, because we're in theatre, you have to be in scrubs.
Yeah.
But, he just looked utterly ridiculous. God love him. And she set up Microsoft Teams and we had a discussion with the barristers. They were in the midst of going through all the legal cases in Australia where anything like this had happened. And they were of the opinion that as far as they knew, there was nothing.
Yeah.
And they ended up having to go back to British common law, so back through Britain or the UK's legal cases as well, to see if any precedent had been sent there. Yep. It's never happened before. And as the law currently stands, as was explained to us at the time, and again just before we got the verdict, they were pretty confident that we would not get a verdict, because the law as it currently stands in New South Wales does not allow for a verdict to be handed down where the defendant has died, no matter what stage of the proceedings you are in. So even though it was less than 24 hours that this occurred,
Yeah.
the law was the law.
Now, so many things to unpack here. That how did that make you feel? That you weren't the verdict that you've been waiting for, the decision, getting some answers, perhaps some answers about what happened to your sister, just taken away from you like that. How did it make you feel?
Initially, I was hoping against hope that we would still get a verdict, because to me, rationally, it was like, well, we've just been through a 13.5-week trial.
Yep.
The evidence has been examined. The judge has already written her verdict. You know, the defendant participated how he wanted to within that trial. And, nothing was going to change the verdict that she had written in, 24 hours before it was due to be handed down. And then I remember feeling really angry, because I felt like this was a final FU, not just to the family I grew up with, and the judge and the legal system, but most of all to Lisel.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be held accountable. He didn't want to be held responsible. And, I think he's a coward. He didn't want to face the prospect, of what one of the possibilities was, or, and I think it was a power play, that he still had control. He was out on bail the entire time, apart from, I think, a couple of months where he was held in remand, and the judge ruled that, because how long it was expected before we were to go to trial and the length of the trial, that it was unfair to keep him in jail.
Yeah.
And it was raised by the DPP that they had considered asking for him to be held in remand, but there was no justifiable reason to put him into remand prior to the trial. He turned up every day. He, had surrendered his passport. That was part of the conditions. There was nothing to indicate that he would not turn up to the verdict being read. They had no justifiable reason.
You can understand the logic there.
And, I just remember hoping against hope that there would be something that would let us get a verdict, regardless of what that verdict was. The other thing that we didn't get is something called a theory of tendency, because, as the judge explained, if she ruled as to whether, it basically came down to whether she accepted his alibi, or not his alibi, but his version of events or not. And it was a very short walk, as she said, from there to work out whether she felt he was guilty or not guilty.
Right, so she didn't articulate that during the trial or during her closing address?
No, because it was so tied up with the verdict.
Okay.
So there were both things that we didn't get.
I'll bring you back to earlier on in the podcast. You said you have absolutely no criticism of the judge, Justice Fullerton, in the matter, in the way that it was conducted, the trial.
Not at all. If anything, I felt when she was reading out why she couldn't give us a verdict, that she was as empathetic and compassionate as she possibly could be. She recognised that, a number of family had travelled from interstate, and that she did say that she hoped that we could understand that the law simply did not allow her to give the verdict. I think, and this is my personal observation from sitting in the courtroom, I think she was just as frustrated and angry that this had occurred as, as what everyone else was.
I've got a quote from her, from what she said after it, and this is from Justice Fullerton. Because of Mr. Church's death yesterday, which brought his trial to an end, I cannot announce my verdict today. I want to assure Mr. Smith's many friends and many family members of her... I'll do this again. I want to assure Miss Smith's many friends and many members of her family that the law simply does not allow me to publicly announce it, or to publish the very lengthy reasons which were ready to be published. Clearly, I can hear the frustration in her, in what she's saying, and the empathy and everything else that we've talked about. To me, and you're very balanced and objective in what you're saying, but you brought it back to the point that it's been through the trial. The trial had finished for all intents and purposes, and it was a verdict to be handed down. The fact that it's never, or they couldn't find any law, common law or anything to refer to, and had to keep digging back, it is such an unusual situation. I haven't seen it in my time. The closest I've come to anything like this was a person that I was looking at for his wife. Surprisingly, disappeared 10 years before, and he reported it. Then his business partner disappeared. I became involved in the investigation when he reported his business partner having disappeared. It looks suspicious to me. That's the second person that's disappeared in his life, and then the wife had disappeared 10 years earlier. We started investigating that matter. We charged him with some drug-related offences. He skipped to interstate. We brought him back, and we got a warrant and brought him back to New South Wales. He was in custody. He was notified that I was coming out to speak to him about the murders, and he killed himself in prison and left a note. But there was, and I felt so bad for the family, the wife's family, because they were looking for answers. They've never found their loved one's body, and they were hoping that if these charges, which looked like they were going to be laid, might give them answers. And I know how cheated they felt, but that matter was referred to the coroner, or his death was referred to the coroner, and from my memory, and it's going back probably 15 or more years, that the coroner made a comment that, based on the information, the most likely scenario is that he took his own life, but he was also involved in the disappearance of the two people. Doesn't give you a definitive answer, but it helps to a degree. Is that something that you think could work with your situation? What recourse do you want?
I think something at this point in time is better than nothing. It was 13 and a half weeks of a huge emotional impact that still has ramifications and consequences on me and my family today. I remember when the judge was reading this out, I just sat there and stared at her. I'm sure she thought I was giving her a death stare, but I actually had tears rolling down my face.
Yeah.
I just something, because at this point we've got nothing. We've got nothing. We don't have any idea where Lisel is. She could be anywhere between the Central Coast and the Upper Hunter Valley. That's a couple of hundred square kilometres.
Yeah.
I understand that, he doesn't have the right to appeal because of what he did, but as I said, something's better than nothing. And at the moment, anything's better than what we've got, which is nada.
I believe his legal team spoke out on his behalf and said, look, he shouldn't be, the verdict hasn't been handed down, so he's not a convicted murderer. and push that aspect of it. You actually reached out to the Attorney General, Mark Speakman, at the time, and you got a response back, and you kindly passed that on to me. I just might read out an extract from that, and this is response that the Attorney General gave to an email sent on the 9th of July 2022. Please accept my deepest sympathy for the tragic loss of your sister and the grief that you and your family have endured. I understand the strong sense of dissatisfaction you have experienced as a result of the conclusion of proceedings. I also understand that you and your family sat through many days of evidence, hoping for an outcome and the resolution to the matter that would bring closure to your family and justice for Lisel. That you were denied that opportunity is a matter about which you have every right to feel aggrieved. I appreciate your concerns about the current state of the law which preclude the judge in this case from delivering her judgment. This is a complex matter, and therefore I have to ask the Department of Community and Justice to provide me with advice on the legal and policy issues involved. I will carefully consider the advice in determining whether any reform is appropriate. To help me to consider the issues further, I would welcome any input you have on your experience in this case, and would ask you that you please contact my executive assistant. That was a email that was a response to an email that you sent to the Attorney General. Getting that must have given you some comfort at the time, that it looks like they're at least looking into it. They're taking your concerns seriously.
Yes and no. It's easy to say things and pass commiserations on when, you know, these things haven't happened to you. And it's easy to express that you understand someone's frustration, as we've spoken about before, unless it's actually happened to you. I don't think people quite understand the frustration, you know, when people give you platitudes and then don't follow up with anything. I had a teleconference call with him shortly after that was organised. And, you know, the Attorney General has the ability to change legislation.
Yes.
I understand that, you know, from a legal point, there needs to be a number of considerations. You know, you don't want to create loopholes where things have to go back to trial, you know, especially if the legislation is made retrospective so that it could apply to Lisel's case, which is what I would be looking for. And that was all well and good, but then I've heard absolutely nothing since that teleconference. I have no idea what they've done. I have no idea whether they've gone any further than that. You know, and I think if it's happened once, it'll happen again. You know, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Well, there's some counter arguments. If they made the legislation, and I've been involved in legislation changes on different matters. I've been involved in Barraville murders, double jeopardy legislation, and I understand the arguments going backwards and forwards. Eventually it was changed. But part of the argument for not changing legislation, if we change this, the sky is going to fall. Everyone's going to, it'll change the very structure of our justice system. It was changed and it didn't happen. This is such a rare occurrence, as the DPP identified, as said they can't find case law on it because we haven't seen it occur. And we're talking at the end of the trial, not during the trial, at the very end of the trial. If they made legislation that covered that, I don't think it would even have to be enacted on very often, but it would prevent what you guys have been through with the situation here. Simple legislation change. I'm not a legal person, clearly, and I'm not informed enough to know the changing legislation. But just from an observational point of view, I can't see that the sky would fall if they made a change to find out what the verdict was going to be handed down, given that the trial had already concluded. You followed up with some letters. Again, still trying to get answers. There was a new Attorney General, and I'll just read out some extracts of more communication that you had with the now new Attorney General. The day before we received the verdict, Mr. Church committed suicide. This meant, as I'm sure you're aware, that we're unable to hear the verdict handed down, as per the current legislation around this. Surely you can emphasise how traumatic that was, especially after giving evidence along with everything pertaining to her disappearance over a decade now, and the ongoing trauma this continues to put us through. We have no closure. We have nothing. To me, that comes as that's pleading on the emotions. Please help us.
I haven't heard a response at all to that.
Well, you didn't finish off there. I'll further in this written communication. I spoke with your predecessor, Mr. Mark Speakman, who indicated this would go to the New South Wales coroner. After 13 and a half weeks of criminal trial and evidence put under the microscope, and the potential to have to reappear, I'm rather aghast, disappointed and frustrated to say the least, not to mention there has been nothing from your office, the coroner or the DPP to indicate what is happening or moving forward. We have no way of recourse. Again, frustration, and you haven't heard anything back.
I haven't had a phone call, I haven't had a text message, I haven't had an email, I've had absolutely nothing.
I find it of interest there that they're mentioning in the New South Wales coroner. Now, I know we had this discussion a few days ago. To me, and this is a very simplistic plan, but I can't see why the matter couldn't be referred to the New South Wales coroner. The coroner could get access to Justice Fullerton's findings, review that with all the other evidence that came out through the trial, and perhaps make a finding on what happened to Lisel. Now, the role of the coroner is to investigate deaths where the cause is unknown, where there is a reason to think that death may not be due to natural causes, to determine the identity and the date, place and circumstances of the death. To me, and again maybe I'm looking at this too simplistically, but that seems to be a solution to this problem. Your thoughts?
As I said, something's better than nothing. I mean, like, legislation would be great, and I'd be rapt if it was changed. That would just be the holy grail, I guess. And legislation is so specific. It's there in black and white. It's very specific to make sure that you can't find loopholes. So
yeah.
I'm sure that it could be done. Failing that, because as you said, they're worried the sky will fall. I mean, never mind that my sky's already fallen, but a coronial inquest, I think, would at least hold Jim Church to accountability. It's not a conviction.
Yep.
But, it's something, and at this point in time, we're most likely never going to find where Lisel is.
Well,
and that's devastating, but at least there would be some accountability, in some sort of respect from, I guess, like a legal standpoint of view, for want of a better phrase.
Well, I think a legal point of view is that at this point you've got zero. It's just up in the air. It's like everything's been thrown up in the air and the pieces haven't landed and no one's going to comment on it. So you're just left wondering. I think if the best you could get is if a person isn't charged with murder, it goes before the coroner for the coroner to determine cause, manner and location, time of death, all the details around what's happened. So it would give you, sorry, I'll take that back because I have no right to say what it would give you. You're the one that's dealing with all the emotional fallout from this. But I would hope then there's some accountability if the coroner came back with a finding. And if we need to protect what Justice Fullerton, we can't just hand it out to everyone because he doesn't have he's no longer here. Surely the system could set up that the coroner could look at it. It doesn't have to make all the findings public, but just based on the information that's contained there, make a very, very informed decision, because this matter has already gone through the Supreme Court as a murder trial as to what happened to Lisel. And the other thing that I see another potential benefit here, if that is done, I think it would be a good opportunity to call out to the media if anyone knows anything that might have happened to Lisel, given the circumstances, that someone that might have been loyal to the accused, now the fact that James Church is deceased, might decide to come forward. That would be a great platform to make an appeal. And then, my understanding, what every family wants when a person's missing and a suspected murder, is to be able to find the body and lay their loved one, with some respect and dignity.
That would be nice. I don't think that Liesl's remains are probably going to be found in my lifetime, which is something that I really struggle with. She's my sister. I want her home, wherever or however that looks. And I think that if we have the ability to get something from the coroner, I would take that. People talk about closure. I've had that mentioned a lot of times to me over the course of this. There will never be closure. There's no such thing as closure for anyone who's got a missing person or, a case such as this where, you don't know where your loved one is. I think there's just more questions. Some questions get answered and others don't, and you have to work out what's important, which is sort of where I'm at as to which questions you want answered. And so at this point in time, I'd take a coroner's inquest, and I would take whatever, the coroner, came up with on the basis of, them examining the evidence from Justice Fullerton, because they would at least allow, the ability to process, and knowing that in some way, he was held accountable. And I'm speaking from my point of view because of what I, observed and what I think. But I just don't understand why, there's been such a lack of response. And as I said, it's not a matter of if this happens again, it's a matter of when, and no other family should go through this. Yeah. This has completely shattered what was left of the family I grew up with. It's certainly had an impact on the way that, my immediate family, so my husband and my kids, interact and deal. It's been extremely stressful. I've had to leave an area of my career that I loved doing because emotionally I had nothing left, which was something that I didn't want to do, but there was no other option for me. And, this is something that I will be dealing with for the rest of my life. And, at some point I'm going to have to explain to my daughter, what's happened to her aunt, because I'm sure with the internet that she'll come across it or something will get said and she's going to have questions and fair enough. What I don't understand is the lack of response from the people that can do something about this. Yeah. I sent 2 letters. I know that there was quite a bit of pressure, but I just don't understand how, there's a lack of consideration for responding. I know that they're busy, but everyone's busy, and, she was my sister. She belonged to a family. She was here, and I'm sure that if this ever happened to any person who, is in politics or the legal system, they'd move heaven and earth to get something to happen. I mean, you've seen it with the police force, for example, something happens, like one of your own happens to one of your own, and you guys do everything you can to work out what happened, and quite rightly, Yeah. I just feel that because, it's not one of their own, that, in some regards, it doesn't have as big of an impact. And I'm sure it matters to them, but it doesn't matter as much as if it was one of their family members. The laws that we have are supposed to reflect society's values and what society holds up as the standard and as being important. And I think in this aspect, they've failed. They don't. I understand that the way that the legal system is geared is that you're innocent till proven guilty. And as I said, I get that. But at the same time, I think there needs to be, in a case like this, a consideration for the victim's family and for the person who, you know, bore the brunt of what happened, which in this case is Liesl. You know, she deserves better than apathy, which is essentially how I feel that, you know, I've gotten at this point. You know, they're just apathetic. It's sort of, while it was in the media, it was important, and oh my gosh, we've got to do something. And now, because it's not front page news anymore, it doesn't matter.
Well, sadly, I've seen it too many times, and you hit on some very good points there. Like the justice system's there to serve the community, and everyone should be treated equal in the justice system. There shouldn't be a disparity about what resources or what things are done because of different who the victim is. It shouldn't come into it. When you reached out to me to ask if I could help, I can't bring any skills as a homicide detective to the table, but what I can do, and you've done it, I've just given you a platform to talk, and I hope people are listening. I hope the policy makers are listening to your account of it, because no one could accuse you of being going off just angry and bitter and you'll never be satisfied. You have been so reasonable, so open, and you've articulated your position so clearly. I hope people do listen to this and push to make a change, because you deserve an answer. Your family deserves an answer. Lisel deserves an answer, and I think she'd be very proud of what you're doing in her memory, and keep fighting to get justice for it. So full credit for coming on and telling us your story.
Thank you, Gary. It's much appreciated.
Okay, we'll be in touch, and let's find out if people do actually get back to you that have told you that they will get back to you. Let's see if they get back to you now.
No worries. Thank you.